Hi, welcome to the 6502 show. Today I've got 3 high-level languages that we're going to take a look at that will all run on the unexpanded PAL-1 or a microKIM. There are 3 high-level languages that will fit inside an unexpanded PAL-1 or microKIM with just 5K of user RAM. The first one I'd like to look at is Tiny Basic. This is Tom Pittman's classic going way back to 1976. Tom wrote this originally for the 6800 and also had a version for 8080. It works absolutely great. All kinds of wonderful things you can do with it. The second language I'd like to look at is VTL-2C. Now, this is Jim's modification of a Mike Berry port of an original Frank McCoy program that ran on the Altair 680 way back in 1976. All I did to this program was move it way down in memory because it was originally part of a ROM, and I changed some zero-page addresses, moved the user RAM down a page to give it a little more room, and so it's now usable on the unexpanded PAL-1. It is a lot like BASIC. It's a little more compact. In fact, VTL stands for Very Tiny Language. So we'll take a look at that briefly as well. Finally, I've got TinyPilot. This is a Nick Vrtis program that appeared in Micro magazine in September 1979. It's a very small subset of Pilot 73, which was the de facto standard back in those days. The version I have is modified by Bob Applegate back when he was a teenager. I typed this program in from the source code in the magazine and added Bob's little additions, made a few of my own, and here we are. Most of us are familiar with some flavor of Microsoft BASIC, whether it's KIM-1 BASIC, KB9, maybe a Commodore type of BASIC you've worked on when you were a kid, or perhaps AppleSoft BASIC when you had your Apple II. Well, there's compromise that has happened in these tiny languages. Let's look at Tiny Basic first. A couple things it does not have. It does not have for next step looping. There's no read data statements. You can't dimension an array. There isn't an array. There's no get string, you can't define a function, no on, go to, or go sub, and stop and wait are out. The only functions it has are peek, random, and user to call an outside machine language program. You're missing some Boolean logic, exponentation, no modulo division, and there are no string variables in Tiny Basic. Can be kind of limiting. You have to get a little creative, but there's certainly plenty of room to play around with that. Next up, VTL-2C, the Very Tiny Language. Also, no for, next, or step, or read data. There is critically no poke command. It can be done in machine language. You're definitely going to want to explore that, perhaps. Oops, sorry about that. And, with for and next, those are easy. You just do an if-then loop with a counter, and you keep going and add 1 to the counter until you hit the number you want, and there's your for next loop. You have some more operators. You've got some Boolean operators. You don't have does not equal, but that's easy to replicate. Critically, though, there are no negative numbers in Very Tiny Language. That does involve some thinking. And it can be done, but anyway. And the last thing to remark here is that there are no multiple character strings, just a single letter. Now, TinyPilot, it's really not fair to make a comparison to the other basics because it's not basic at all. It's Pilot. And it can take in input, it can produce output, it can calculate, test, branch, and loop. All the basic things you need to do with computing. It does have a random number generator, thanks to Jim Butterfield and Bob Applegate. And the only operators are plus and minus, and the only comparator is equals. Now, you can do multiplication and division. You can even do less than and greater than. There are plenty of ways to do that with loops. Here's a chart showing the sizes of these various languages. Tiny Basic, 2¼ VTL 2C, 1.1K. Tiny Pilot, exactly 1 kilobyte. Well, plus a few extra bytes in Riot RAM so that I could flesh out the X command. But these leave, of course, varying amounts of user RAM. And you really get your most bang for the buck with VTL2C. Lots of room for programs and does pretty much everything that Tiny Basic is going to do. Interestingly, the amount of user RAM free with Tiny Pilot, if you've ever had a VIC-20, that number should look awfully familiar. Now we're going to take a look at the code that these three languages generate. What you're seeing on the screen here in these three windows is the exact same function in three different kinds of code. And right off the bat, you can probably tell that on the right, Tiny Basic and VTL look pretty much the same. Now we're going to take a look at the print statements. Here's Tiny Basic, and it looks exactly as you would expect, especially if you've got any experience at all with Microsoft Basic or Commodore, Apple, Atari, etc. Now take a look down in the bottom right. There's the print statement in VTL2. Really similar. All you're doing is just swapping out print for question mark equals. And that's about it. Now, a little more interesting here is this comparison. So what we're going to do is we want to branch somewhere if this is true. Well, we're getting the same thing here in VTL2. This is a comparison of Y and B. If Y and B are true, Boolean 1, then we're going to multiply that by the line number we want to jump to. And the hashtag says go to this line number. So if it's not true, if they don't equal, we'll have a 0. And 0 times 670 is nothing. So you can't branch to nothing in VTL2, so it'll just fall right through. One of the limitations of this construction is that you can't do anything else with it but branch. So you can't say if Y equals B, then X equals A, and then do something else. So you have to find other ways to do that. Now let's compare this with Tiny Pilot. I'm going to highlight the similar code that is on the right to the left. And yeah, it's all of it. Pilot is a completely different animal, and there's just a different structure to the way you have to do things, which actually makes it kind of neat, I think. So what we're going to do is a calculation. We're going to move Y into the string checking area, and that will be the ASCII value of Y. And then after that, we're going to check it with a match, and we're going to see if it matches the ASCII value of B. So we're matching for Y and B. Are they equal? Are they not? Well, if they are equal, we're going to jump down to label H. There's label H. So we're going to jump down to label H, which is exactly the same as saying this. Because 670 skips past all of that and then tests for X and A. And that's what we would be doing here. We'd test for X and A. The rest of this part here, this is all basically a less than statement. We're going to test for less than, and we're going to do it inside of a loop. In a future video, I'll go into much more detail about Tiny Pilot and some of the weird and interesting things you can do with it when you only have plus, minus, and equals. But for right now, I think the big takeaway is that, especially with VTL and Tiny Basic do pretty much exactly the same thing. All right, let's see these bad boys in action. Here we've got Hercule running under Tiny Basic, Bob Albrecht, People's Computer Company, way back in the 70s. And this plays as you would expect. It looks almost exactly like the Microsoft version. Now to VTL2C. Again, very similar. Slight difference here in the input method. Because you can't input multiple variables on a single line. Got to do it twice. But plays the same. Now on to Tiny Pilot. We have lowercase letters in this case. You can do that also with Tiny Basic. We're going to seed the random number generator first. Good idea with this thing. And again, the input method is very similar to VTL2. Gets the job done. And also teaches kids maybe a little prompting for X and Y, thinking about grids. Oh, hey, we're awfully close. All right, 3 guesses. But we probably don't need to play again, do we? And there you have it. 3 high-level languages that all run on the unexpanded PAL-1 or a microKIM. You can probably tell I have a little bias towards VTL2C. It's just the biggest bang for the buck. If you've only got so much RAM, that's the place I'd go to make my programs. I want to thank you for watching, and if you like it, hit the like button, and you can all subscribe to get updated on all the great content we're going to have coming up here all summer long. So, until we see each other again, take care.